Hi everybody, and welcome to the Teaching Kitchen at Dave's Market in Midtown Cleveland. My name is Juliana Blischak and I'm a registered dietitian with Sodexo at University Hospitals.
And I'm Ryan Hamel, and I'm the Senior Culinary Manager for University Hospitals.
Awesome. So the theme of today's class is quick breads. Maybe during quarantine you are making some breads, but I know for a lot of people to make their own bread it seems like a chore. But we're here to show you how easy and worthwhile it can be. And just like with anything that you make at home versus getting it from the store, you get to be in control. So, you know, if you're trying to be mindful of your sugar, fat, sodium, fiber, whatever, making your own can be a good way to be mindful of that. And of course, there's nothing tastier than fresh bread made from scratch. So, Ryan, take it away.
Thank you, Juliana. So as Juliana said, we are going to be making quick breads today. And quick breads differ than traditional yeast leavened breads in that we use a chemical leavener. So we're using baking soda or baking powder to actually leaven the bread versus yeast or a sourdough starter. These came together in America in probably like mid 1800s when specifically we were looking to mobilize armies and the military. They used this to feed the military easier, or fast food basically. They come together really quickly. They don't have to rise like we would traditionally with the yeast leavened bread, and you don't need to knead them. In fact, the less you work with them, the more tender they become because the gluten doesn't get developed in the flour. Okay. So we're gonna do a couple different recipes. One is a traditional Irish soda bread. It's actually my family's recipe. It's something that I eat every year. I absolutely love it. It's not like the most nutritious stuff on the planet, but it's delicious, and sometimes you have to treat yourself, right? And the other we're gonna do is a batter-based banana walnut bread, and we are going to do a couple tricks with the banana walnut bread to make it a little bit healthier than we would typically. So we're gonna start with that recipe first, actually. And I've got all my ingredients right here. Now this is great if we're actually gonna be using overripe bananas here. You can see these are real brown and spotty. This is even past the point of being like fun, sweet, edible, but the sugars have been developed. So you actually get away with using less sugar because the bananas are just naturally sweeter in this stage. So we're going to start out by mixing our dry ingredients in a bowl. So I've got some whole wheat flour here, and I've got some AP flour. And Juliana, you want to talk about like why we're adding the whole wheat flour to the mix?
Of course. So whole wheat versus the AP, of course, all purpose, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So the whole wheat flour is going to have some extra fiber in it. And as you know, we love to talk about fiber on these videos. We do talk about it ad nauseum. So yeah, that's going to add some extra fiber. The toasted walnuts are going to add extra fiber in addition to protein, healthy fats. So really, you know, anywhere we can add a little extra nutrition, hey, why not?
Yep. So I'm going to take these bananas and I'm just going to peel them. I don't know if you guys have seen this trick, but I always pinch the bottom here versus taking it from the top. And the banana comes out, and we're going to use a potato masher. And I'm just going to really, it doesn't take a lot. When you're doing this, try to do the potato masher in a metal bowl or a Pyrex bowl. In the past, I've used a plastic bowl, and then I found like shards of plastic in the ingredients, so stay away from that.
Could you also use like a fork if you don't have a mashed potato
masher? A fork,
masher?
the back of a slotted spoon. There's 1,000,001 different things you could use. The potato masher just helps kind of make quick work of it.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna get rid of this. So I've got the flour mixed together in here. I'm gonna add, I've got a little baking soda and a little bit of kosher salt. And then grab a whisk. We're gonna whisk all of this together. Now I've got my bananas in one, and then in a third bowl, I'm gonna add, I've got brown sugar, and we're using a 1/2 cup packed brown sugar. And I've got a little bit of unsalted butter that I toasted up in a saute pan. Ooh. And the reason that I browned it is to kind of add a little more caramely notes, and it helps deeper flavors.
Yum.
And you can see there's like little brown solids in there.
Huh.
And we're gonna mash the butter and the brown sugar together. My brown sugar kind of dried up a little bit, but we're gonna mash it together like. To kind of make a little paste here. Now we're going to be mixing our dry ingredients separately from our wet ingredients, and this helps keep everything separate. So when we do end up mixing it together, it's easier to mix it all together completely. We're gonna add our vanilla here. I've got 1 egg, 1 large egg. We're gonna crack right in there. And whisk it all together. And that's gonna help the sugar dissolve a little bit. You can see kind of making a nice little mess here, and then we're gonna add our applesauce. And
I was waiting for you to put in that applesauce.
Right. So we're actually adding applesauce to cut back on a little bit of the butter and a little bit of the sugar. The applesauce is going to add moisture back into the dish that we lost when we subtracted some of the butter out. But applesauce is naturally sweet. This is unsweetened applesauce, but it's still got a little bit of natural sweetness to it, and it's gonna keep the bread nice and moist in the end. So actually, like when you eat it, you don't need to slather it with butter or anything.
Yeah, that's awesome. If you want to use the applesauce trick in other recipes, typically, any recipe that calls for oil, you could do like half applesauce, half oil, just to cut back a little bit. But have fun with that because it's a really cool trick, and like he said, keeps it nice and moist.
So I've added my bananas into my sugar and applesauce egg mix, and we are going to add the flour mix to our wet ingredients. And once we get here, we're just going to stir it very gently because we don't want to overmix. If we overmix, we're going to develop gluten in the flour, and it's going to make it really tough. And this is just going to keep it nice and dry, or nice and moist rather. So we're just going to gently whisk it together, moving the bowl around, making sure it's fully incorporated, just until it looks like it's completely kind of homogeneous, so to speak. And then, earlier today, I baked this in a bread pan. I don't know if you can see that on there. We don't have a loaf pan here, but it also works out pretty well in muffin tins. So I've got some muffin tins here, and we're just gonna blast them with a little bit of pan spray. Pan spray is kind of fun to keep on hand versus butter because it's easier to control the amount that you're adding to it. Mm-hmm. You don't have to use so much. And then we're gonna take, about a tablespoon, and we're gonna fill these muffin tins about half full. And I like putting them directly in the muffin tin versus using muffin cups because the muffin cups end up sticking to the muffins. And I also like that it browns up a little bit on the outside because that's kind of a nicely developed flavor. I forgot to add the pecans. So I'm gonna add half of them, and we're gonna have some that have pecans and some that don't have pecans. So we'll just fill these up halfway up. So if we're gonna bake it in a loaf pan, you wanna go about 40 to 50 minutes. We're baking these in muffin tins, so we're gonna cut it back to probably 15 to 20 minutes.
So if you're in a hurry, you want the quickest thing possible,
right.
Muffins would be the way to go, it sounds like.
Right. We're kind of in a hurry today, so. And yeah, see how easy that comes together? Like once you put all of your stuff in little bowls and kind of get yourself organized, we call that mise en place, and having everything together in restaurants and kitchens. And then we can take these and put these in a 350 degree oven for, like I said, about 12 to 15 minutes.
Awesome. Yeah, while he puts those in, just want to add about this recipe. We always like to encourage you to be creative, experiment with recipes. And, with baking, it's tough because like he was saying, there is a science to it. You know, you might get some flops, but we encourage you to tailor it to your own individual needs. You know, you don't like walnuts, don't do the walnuts. You're trying to cut back on, you know, fat in general, try all applesauce, see how it turns out. Play with it and have fun with it, and, you know, see what you can create.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. So the next thing we're gonna make is Irish soda bread. Irish soda bread is not from Ireland. It is from America. It was traditionally made by factory workers in the mid 1800s, again, when soda and soda ash and potash kind of became regularly available. Arm & Hammer baking soda was one of the first mass-produced baking sodas. It did come from the US. This was kind of like, it's a quick way to feed people cheaply, I guess.
So were they Irish workers?
Yeah, right. Irish factory workers, sorry. This is traditionally actually, this is my wife's father's recipe. She's one of 8. They love soda bread. They eat it all the time. It's, you know, flour, butter, raisins. It's real, like, items, inexpensive items that kind of come together nice and quickly. So this recipe is super easy. We're going to take our flour and baking powder, baking soda, and salt, and our sugar, right? Yes. So our flour, sugar, we have baking powder, baking soda, and salt, and that all goes in there. Now, as I said earlier, this is like soda breads typically are leavened with the reaction of the acid from the buttermilk and the soda mixing together and making all bubbles, and that's what's going to lift them up. This is one of those recipes that you kind of got to play by feel because it's not, the atmosphere might be a little bit drier, so you might need a little bit more liquid. If it's super humid outside, you might need less liquid. But we're going to start with 1 full cup of buttermilk. We might need to add a couple tablespoons extra though if it doesn't come together, so we'll play it by ear. I'm taking cold butter, and we're just going to break that up and mix it into the flour. And this is one where if you have kids, this is fun to get kids involved because it helps them, you know, they get their hands in there and play around with it. So we break it up into little chunks and then kind of coat the little chunks in a flour and squeeze it and play with it and talk about other things while we're doing this for a minute.
So that's my cue, right?
Yes.
So I'm really happy that Ryan is sharing this family recipe with us today. I think it's really, really important to note that there is always a place for traditional recipes and foods from our culture, even if this one is from America, in a balanced diet. You know, although we normally try to demo foods that are lower in salt, fat, sugar, all of that, this is a really good opportunity to talk about portion size and how to incorporate richer dishes like the soda bread into our diet, because that's real life. Not everything we eat is perfectly nutritional. And you know, if we strive for that, sometimes that all or nothing mindset can really be more harmful than it is helpful in trying to stick with a healthful eating plan that's actually sustainable.
So I've also made this dish with whole wheat flour, and we could have. You just probably substitute out about half the flour with whole wheat flour, or else it gets a little bit too dense. Okay. Whole wheat flour is a little bit tricky to work with sometimes. But now it's starting to come together. You can see when I make a fist and squeeze it all together, it kind of like wet sand or beach sand. And then the butter chunks are about loose gravel size. Another thing that's going to help leaven this bread is there's moisture in the butter, and since it was so cold, it's going to kind of create little pockets in the dough, and when the butter melts, it's going to create steam, and steam's going to help us leaven this dough as well. So the next step, once it's kind of like, you know, that, is we're going to add our raisins, and then I've got the cup of buttermilk here. And now once we have the buttermilk, we kind of got to work pretty quickly, and it's going to be a bit of a dash, but we're going to make 2 loaves out of this, and I've already got my pans here, some cookie sheets with a little bit of parchment on it, so like I'm ready to go when I'm ready to go, kind of a thing, right? So let me get this out of the way. And then we'll just add our buttermilk. And I use my fingers for this. You could use a spoon, but I feel like it comes together a little bit easier. Like making pasta at home, that's, get your hands in there, kind of work with it. But don't overwork it because then it'll get really tough. Now this is, together a little bit. I'm gonna add a little bit more buttermilk. Like I said, a couple tablespoons. It's cold where we're at right now, and the air's a little bit drier, so.
So what's the ideal consistency that we're trying to get to?
So it will actually, it's gonna look like it's not right for the longest time, and then as you kind of mix it together, and the flour hydrates with the buttermilk, it's going to come together kind of like Play-Doh, I guess.
Okay. Yeah.
But a little bit softer than that. Just a touch more buttermilk, actually, and I think we'll be good to go here. You'll see it. It's like not right until it's perfect. And just like that, it is kind of like, I guess, more like biscuit dough almost.
Okay. I
If
feel like
you've ever made
that's
homemade biscuits.
therapeutic.
Yeah. I love playing with this stuff. In fact, my in-laws have a huge St. Patrick's Day party every year, and we usually hand out, we haven't over the past couple of years, but we hand out a loaf of soda bread to everybody that comes to the house. So we'll end up making like 150 loaves of soda bread over the course of like 2 or 3 days leading up to it.
So you're a pro. Well, we already knew you were a pro, but you're...
Right. So once it all starts to come together, you can see it's kind of sticky, but this is good. We're gonna make about a softball sized loaf, and we just kind of press it into a little disc. It's not like a perfect science. It's and same thing here. Whoop. Like it's still gonna be a little bit loose, and that's okay. But we're gonna put it on the table for a second here and pull it all together. And then we'll make a little disc here, and then that goes right in the middle of the tray. And it's okay if it's not like fully stuck together. It will come out great. I'm gonna wash my hands really quick.
While he washes his hands. So if you've watched these videos before, you know I really like to emphasize the importance of listening to your body's hunger and fullness cues. But let's face it, sometimes that's easier said than done, right? Many of us grew up in households with the Clean Plate Club. So, if it's on your plate, whether you're full or not, you have to finish it. And that is just one example of the psychological factors and the environmental factors that might be affecting how much we eat. So, you ready?
Yep, sorry. So right before we put this in the oven, we're gonna draw like an X on the top of it with a little serrated knife. And then we'll chuck it in the oven for about 25 minutes or so. And you wanna run the X maybe like a quarter, eighth of an inch deep. And we're in a 325 degree oven for 25 minutes. And if you have two of them going in at the same time, rotate them about halfway through. That way you get the bottom one back on the top and the top one back on the bottom.
All right.
And they're cooking, and I'm done cooking. So I guess I can show you what these look like after they come out of the oven. This is the banana bread, and I allow it to cool at room temperature for about 25 to 30 minutes, and then you can wrap it up in plastic and save it in a refrigerator for up to 2 or 3 days, up to 4 days probably. And then this is what the soda bread looks like when it comes out. You can see a little X on the top. It's dense. It's not like, like yeast bread would be kind of like light and airy. It's got a crumb to it. This is a little bit different. But when you cut it open, you can see, the raisins are in there. And then we usually end up cutting this into like little triangles, and that kind of goes with corned beef and cabbage for dinner on St. Patrick's Day.
Nice.
And that's quick breads.
Yeah, awesome. I feel like we're on the Great British Baking Show. I'm looking at the distribution of your raisins.
Right.
It looks good.
Right? I think Paul Hollywood would probably get on my case about leaving a big mess, but.
Well, just to wrap it up here, as I was saying, there's a lot of stuff that can influence how much we eat at one time, especially if we have something really, really delicious in front of us. But, being aware of those different factors is key so we can set ourselves up for success. And some simple advice to kind of get started in being more mindful when you're eating is take your meals and snacks to the table and sit down. Instead of being in front of the TV or in the car, sit down. You might also experiment with a smaller dish size, a smaller plate. That way you're starting with a smaller portion. Once you finish that portion, if you're still hungry, that's fine, but this is kind of like an automatic way for you to slow down, check in with yourself before you decide if you are really hungry for that second portion or if you're already full. So just remember, whether you're enjoying a traditional bread or bread with some swaps, just try to be mindful and present to avoid overeating and enjoy.